My name is Darren Kuropatwa, and this is my keynote presentation for the 2010 K-12 Online Conference, Kicking It Up a Notch Strand. And in this little talk, about 20 minutes or so, I hope to share some ideas that I've had. Maybe some of these ideas are familiar to some of you, about different ways that teachers might go about kicking it up a notch, kind of bringing things up to the next level. And I've been thinking about this stuff for a long time, and it kind of occurs to me that it has to do well with a lot of intersections. The intersections of a lot of things. If you've been using web-based tools for a while now, you've noticed something about time and space. They bring an ability to us to control time and space in a way that was never possible before. Typically, in the traditional classroom, we were locked into learning in a same physical space at the same physical time. But now we can kind of manipulate space using tools like Google Docs, Illuminate, DimDim, Skype, where we may have to be locked into a certain time for learning, but we don't have to be in the same spaces. There are other examples where we can control time but not space. For example, things like museums, where you go to learn something in the same physical space as other people, but you don't have to be there all at the same time. Geocaching is another example, and if you've played it a lot, then you know that you can learn a lot through geocaching. And web-based courses is another example. Although that's a digital space where you learn a course online, everybody has to be in that particular space to learn, although they don't have to do it at the same time. With the advent of other tools like blogs, wikis, podcasting, and more, we can actually manipulate both time and space and move beyond these things. But the question is that really innovative practice? Is that really kicking it up a notch? Isn't it possible to be an excellent teacher, to do really wonderful teaching and learning in classrooms where we're not using these web-based tools, where we are locked into that traditional space? What does innovative teaching really look like? Innovative teaching looks like lots of different things. But I think it's going to have, in terms of this discussion about space and time, it's not about just manipulating space and time. It's about the silver lining that runs perpendicular to this axis of space and time that we've been talking about. I think that if you really want to kick it up a notch, we've kind of got to go perpendicular to all of this. And what I've kind of noticed is that the kinds of activities that people find really engaging move along a different axis. At the bottom, we have kind of the classic teacher-student interaction, where the teacher directs the learning of the class, and teachers and students work together to figure things out. And in moving up that scale, then in a really dynamic classroom, you're going to get kids working with kids, and that's more engaging. You know, if you walk into a classroom and you see all the kids huddled around something, talking about it, trying to figure something out, well, that just naturally seems to be more engaging than just the teacher talking to the class. Now, when the teacher and the students all together are kind of mixing it up and you've got that full class interaction, well, that's kind of kicking it up a notch to another level. And what really kind of blows the top off things, which is something that was made possible by all these web-based tools, is kind of like when outsiders can have that full class interaction. When you can bring in experts, or other kids from other classes can interact with the kids in your class, or teachers from anywhere around the world, or invite someone in to have a Skype call. Stuff like that. That seems to be the kind of thing that kind of kicks it up a notch. You can have awesome classes in the fixed time and fixed space of the classroom. You can have an awesome learning experience in Illuminate or using Skype, where you may have to be at a certain time in the same place as everyone else, but in different spaces. Museums can be great, and you don't all have to be there at the same time. And podcasts and blogs can be great too, where they can be really flat and they can be really unengaging. But when you weave in the outside world and this kind of dynamic interaction, moving up the scale from student-teacher to student-student to full class, and finally the world with the class, well, that's really kicking it up a notch. Have you ever seen wolves battle for dominance? I mean, really go at it? The losing wolf does something really remarkable. It lies down on the ground and exposes its neck to the victor. The winning wolf will growl and snarl and walk around and make all kinds of noises, but it won't touch the losing wolf as long as it lays down. If it stands up, then they go at it again. See, with wolves, their culture, their society, and the tools that they use in their culture and society, their fangs, their claws, their strength, they've kind of evolved hand in hand so that the way they use their tools and the way they interact with each other in society doesn't lead to them hurting each other. The society evolves, but they use their tools in ethical ways because the evolution of their tools went hand in hand with the evolution of their culture. That's not true about us. We advance the use of our tools way faster than we do our culture. And that's where McLuhan comes in and says we shape our tools, and then our tools shape us. It's kind of like with cell phones now. The cell phone was not invented so that we could have proximity dating. You know, when you go downtown, you're going to meet your friend, and you say, well, where do you want to meet? Well, you say, well, I'll just meet you downtown. And then you get on a cell phone and you say, okay, well, I'm about here. Oh, yeah, I see you. Hi, how are you? When I was a kid, I had to know like the date, the time, the place exactly because we didn't have those cell phones. So we shape our tools, and then our tools shape our behavior. Unfortunately, some of those behaviors, because the tools have advanced so much more quickly than our culture, aren't always ethical. And that's unfortunate. You know, there's the cautionary tale of Stacy Snyder. You may have heard of her. A teacher who... or she was going to be a teacher. She finished all her degree work, all her coursework down in Florida, and the university sees a picture of her on Facebook wearing a pirate hat and drinking out of a cup at a party. And they decide this is not the kind of impression that they want teachers, or this is not the persona that they want teachers to have in the real world when they're working with kids. And so they deny her her diploma. Of course, the case goes to court, etc., and you can look up more about this online, but it's just an example of, you know, how we use Facebook or other tools has not evolved at the same rate that our culture has evolved, and that's kind of an important piece of all these things. Now, does that mean that we shouldn't publish student work online? No, of course we should publish student work online. There's this wonderful story about this grade 5 class. Very quickly, they sing a song, the teacher videotapes them, puts it on their class blog and on YouTube, and it's Landslide by Stevie Nicks. And Stevie's tour manager sees the video on YouTube, shows it to Stevie. Long story short, the kids, grade 5 class, gets invited to Madison Square Gardens where they perform with Stevie Nicks. They've since performed with all kinds of performers from all over the world because of that one possibility, that one interaction. So putting ourselves online isn't a bad thing, but we've got to learn to be like the wolves. We've got to find a way so that we can evolve our ethical behavior, or we shouldn't be like McLuhan says, we shape our tools and then our tools shape us. Let us shape how we use our tools in ethical and responsible ways. There's a story that Lawrence Lessig tells about when he's traveling on a train in Russia with a visiting professor. And the two of them are talking on the train, just discussing things, and the professor turns to the young 20-something Lawrence Lessig and says, you know, we're far more well-informed about what's going on in the world here in Russia than you Americans ever will be. Which completely floors Lawrence. He says, communist Russia, where your newspapers are filtered and edited and controlled about what you can learn and how you can learn it. How can you possibly say that you're more well informed when we have free open press in the United States? And the professor turns to him and says, see, that's just the thing with you Americans. You think that when you read those newspapers that you're reading the truth. See, in Russia, we know they're lying to us. So we'll read 6, 7 different papers, and from that we'll try to distill the truth, what actually is going on. It's an interesting kind of observation. I mean, I think that's probably true about me in Canada, everyone, no matter where we are. I think we also need to learn to be Russian, circa 1980. behind that is this notion of kind of triangulating information. I once received an email saying, congratulations, you've been nominated in the top 100 education blogs from the online educational database. Sounded like I got an award. Anyways, I did some digging and I kind of used all the tools that were available to me. I Googled the fellow's name. I took his website and I went to check it out at Easy Who Is to see who owns that website. I went over to the Wayback Machine at archive.org and looked into the history. The kind of, content analysis that Alan November often talks about. And I discovered it was just this fellow who started up a website just a few months earlier, and he works in marketing, and he's trying to make a buck, really. And what he did was he linked to me and a bunch of other wonderful bloggers in the field of education, and I guess he was trying to build up some link status for himself. So I didn't win any award, but it was that triangulating of information, trying to go to many sources to figure out what was going on. I think that's kind of another piece of this puzzle. We need to learn to be like the wolves. We need to learn to be Russian. It's from Aesop's Fables. Maybe you've heard of it, The Bundle of Sticks. The story goes, in brief, very quick, there's an older man who's coming towards the end of his life, and he's worried about his 3 sons because they're constantly bickering, and they're just not getting along with each other. He's worried because when he goes, he's afraid that they won't be there to support each other. So he asks each of them to collect a stick and bring it to him, which they do. And then he takes the sticks and he ties them up in this bundle. And once they've done that, he says to the oldest, he said, take the bundle and crack it across your knee. Well, it's this big bundle of sticks. And he tries to crack it across his knee and he can't. And he goes, it's too heavy, it's too thick. Goes to the next brother, asks the same, and then the same of the third. And of course, nobody can break it. And he says to them, well, open the bundle and each of you remove one of the sticks, which they do. He says, now crack those over your leg, which they do easily. He says, now do you see what I mean? As long as you work together and support each other, you will be as unbreakable as the bundle of sticks. And I think there's a lesson in that story that relates to pedagogy, to how we teach. Getting kids to work together and not trying to defeat each other in terms of I want to get a better mark than you do. But how can we use these web-based tools so that kids are working not for grades, but for social credit, to be recognized by their peers as having done something cool so that they do something cool as well. That's the kind of collaboration, interdependence, I think, that leads to some really remarkable things happening in a classroom. There's this grade 6 teacher who starts her year every year the same way. The kids come into class the first day, and she says to them, what questions do you have about your world and about yourself? I just want you to write them down, make a list. And then one kid always asks, well, can I write like a silly question? Is that okay? And the teacher says, well, if it's a question you have about your world or about yourself, then that's not silly. Go ahead, anything you can think of. So the kids write up all these questions, and then they look at the lists and they say, okay, well, let's look at the questions you all have and see which ones fit together. And they kind of make these lists, and they say, well, these questions all go here, and these here, and these here. And they kind of make these lists. And then when they're all done, there's the math curriculum, there's the social studies curriculum, there's the science curriculum, there's the language arts curriculum. And they've kind of, now that's an incredible command of pedagogy that teacher has, because over the course of the rest of the year, as these kids work together and they get to reporting time, the kids ask, well, how are we going to get reported? Like, it's report card time, what's it going to be on? And then the teacher starts showing them the curriculum and says, well, you've learned this and this and this and this and this. And they say, really? We learned all that? Wow, I thought we were just having fun. Now, these 3 things that I've talked to you about. First, I talked to you about the wolves. Well, that story about the wolves, that's really a story about technology. That's about, being ethical and thoughtful in the way that we use technology. We can use these tools to cause harm, but if we're careful and thoughtful about it, we can use these tools to do a lot of good. The second story I told you about being Russian, well, that was really a story about content and how we approach working with content and triangulating content from many sources. And the third story, the bundle of sticks, well, that's really a story about pedagogy. That's kind of like our dream of how, it's my dream, I guess, of how I've always wanted to see things work out in my own class. Of course, all of that happens in some context. Each of us are unique in different areas, teaching different things, different grades, etc. But when you put it all together, that's the total package, what's known as the TPAC model of education. And teachers live in that intersection. A long time ago, I learned from Alan Levine that ed tech is not a spectator sport, and through my own experience, that serendipity befalls those who give it a go. So how can we be deliberate about creating these serendipitous opportunities?
I'm Chance, the gardener.
The gardener?
Yes. Since I was a child, I worked in this garden.
Then you really are a gardener?
Oh, yes.
May I ask your name?
Chance, the gardener.
Mr. Chancey Gardner. Are you related to Basil and Perdita Gardner?
No, I'm not related to Basil and Perdita.
You know, a while back, I published a post on my blog. It was April 2009. I called it Rules to Live By, and I was kind of talking about how I was trying to update the way I was planning my lesson plans. And I threw out a lesson that I had done just that day, and I said, you know what, this isn't great, it's better than it was last year, but I'd love to hear from other people who may have some idea about how I could kind of kick this up a notch. How could I do this a little bit better? And then Dan Meyer, over in California, kind of picks that up, and he says, you know, I can't resist that kind of invitation. And he goes ahead, and he does a whole redesign, not just on my whole slide deck, but he picks out one slide. And he actually did a way better job than I had done on it. But then Jason Dyer picks up on Dan's redesign, and he redesigns Dan's redesign, and everybody's kind of sharing this through their blogs. Now, I've never met Dan, and I've never met Jason. But the next time I teach that particular lesson, it's going to be heaps a lot better because of the pushback that's happened between Dan and Jason and I. The point to all this blogging going on is that it gives me an opportunity to reflect on my practice, an opportunity that I might not have in the course of my ordinary day. And it also is a sustained dialogue, a serendipitous sustained dialogue that I have with other educators facing similar kinds of issues as I am. And together, sharing our thoughts in this way provides a kind of cognitive presence for us online, where we get to share our ideas with each other, push back, and grow. I share all my stuff. Like every lesson that I do, well, I publish that out on SlideShare. Save the slides. I've got the good fortune to have a smartboard, so I just save them every day, including all the kids' notes, and we put that up on SlideShare so the kids have access to it, but so do other teachers. And on my class blogs, where one of the things that we do on the class blogs is something that's kind of gained a little traction lately is scribe posts. One kid summarizes everything they learned in class that day well enough for an interested learner to learn from them. They finish their scribe post by choosing another student in the class who's going to carry that forward the following day. And that continues. It's kind of, the kids do some really awesome stuff with that. Well, over on the sidebar of my personal blog or my professional blog, The Difference, I've got a list of all those class blogs. So anybody else who kind of wants to pick up on what's going on with my classes and how I'm working with them, well, go right ahead. I also, on my personal blog, I've got a link to all the different lesson plans and files that I share, tests, exams, whatever. Anybody who wants it, well, you're welcome to have at it. I've got a wiki where I keep it all stored, and on my blog, A Difference, there's a link there that says shared files at the top. You're welcome to have it all. And all these things together kind of form what I call my professional presence, which is kind of like another intersection, the intersection between my professional presence and my cognitive presence, what I'm thinking about as a teacher and how I'm wrestling with how I'm going to get better at that, and sharing the actual stuff that I do so that other teachers can use it if they wish or not. National Academies Press, they published this little ebook called Learning and Understanding. And in there they enumerate 7 principles of learning that is true about all people, about how they learn and how to improve learning. And one of them is this one. Learning is enhanced through socially supported interactions. Well, something like Twitter for me is that place where I can kind of get social with other people. Dean, a while back, quotes this out at Mark Wagner: if you're going to consider Twitter, you better be prepared to be social and personal. And if that's not for you, it might not work. Well, I don't know if you have to be social and personal. Maybe social and professional is a little better. But of course, it's true. Over time, those professional social connections do evolve into personal connections. And some people I've become quite good friends with. Some people I regard as even my best of friends have kind of evolved out of those connections on Twitter. Twitter's not the only place to be social, though. I'm, just for fun, I'm taking a picture every day, and I'm sharing it in my Flickr account. So I joined this group of other teachers, and they called it EdTech 365 2010. So I joined that group, and I share my photo there. And there's about over 200 people, teachers from around the world, sharing their daily pictures of their daily lives. It's just kind of interacting socially. Then there's this other group, which is, I think it's mostly teachers, but it's got a lot of other people too. It's just called 2010, 365 photos. And I'm sharing there too and connecting with people. People leave comments on my photos. It's kind of seeing a glimpse into people's lives all over the world. When it's winter in the northern hemisphere, it's summer in the southern hemisphere, and it's really neat to see those kinds of contrasts. And then there's the daily shoot, where if you're stuck for what to take a picture of, well, you can get a daily assignment, but there's a group pool on Flickr, so you can share that photo every day. And people who you know nothing about from all walks of life, there's over 900 members there, pushing 1,000, shared over 21,000, as of today, different pictures that they've taken following these assignments. Well, why do all these things matter? Why does it matter when you connect these things? Social presence matters because it builds social capital. And social capital is important because it provides the interpersonal glue that supports us each and every day in our communities of practice, our communities of inquiry, our professional learning network, or whatever it is you want to call it. Just like for Chance the Gardener, oftentimes if you're willing to give it a go, serendipity will follow. So I've told you 3 more stories of a more personal nature. The first one where I talked about how I use my blog to develop my cognitive presence online, where I can exchange ideas and get help from other teachers around the world. I told you a second story about how I share what I'm actually doing in my classroom, the actual concrete work that I'm doing with kids, publishing my lessons, sharing my files, making them freely available to other people. And then thirdly, I talked about how things like Twitter or even Flickr are part of my social presence online. And the intersection of those 3 things really support each other and one another. Teachers kicking it up a notch live in this intersection too. So in the end, it's about a lot more than manipulating time and space. It's about trying to find ways to bring the world inside your class in a meaningful way, in dynamic ways. And in order to do that, you're going to need to leverage some social capital somewhere and invite the world in deliberately. And none of this is going to really work unless you've got a solid, strong, firm grounding in how technology, content, and pedagogy mash together in meaningful ways.